why did Paul not know who the high priest was? So first, let's read over this passage together, which is found in Acts 23, and I'm going to go to verses 2 to 5. The high priest Ananias commanded those standing beside him to strike him on the mouth, aka strike Paul on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do you sit to try me according to the law, and in violation of the law order me to be struck? But the bystanders said, do you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I was not aware, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. So in this passage, there are things that seem a little off. For starters, why does Paul seemingly not know who the high priest is? You have to remember that Paul was a Pharisee himself, so he should be accustomed to the Jewish law, the Jewish council, who is running what. This is something that someone like Paul should know, even after doing his missionary work. Another thing that seems off from this passage is how quickly Paul seemingly retracts his statement. One moment he seems a little heated, even calling him, the high priest Ananias, a whitewashed wall. But then right after, he is quoting scripture and quickly switches his tone. So what's really going on here? Well, what if I told you there was a backstory to this that you might not know? Josephus Flavius is one of the greatest historians of the first century. He wrote about the Jewish wars. He wrote about what we know as antiquities. He even wrote about Jesus himself because he was a historian of the first century. Now, I am going to provide you with the references below as to what I am going to be referring to, but essentially Ananias was actually the high priest during the time of Quirinius, but Ananias actually had shady business and tactic. He was not the best when it came to keeping money and money affairs just in general. So he was actually sent to Caesar, Julius Caesar. As a result, Jonathan becomes the high priest. So he is the successor of Ananias. Unfortunately, Jonathan was actually, while he was serving as the high priest, and because the seat of the high priest was empty after what happened to Jonathan, Ananias actually just takes over the role for himself, and he uses it to gain influence and power over the people. So when Paul says, I was not aware, brethren, that he was the high priest, Paul is actually being sarcastic here. Paul already knows who Ananias is, but Paul is actually being sarcastic and calling out the fact that Ananias is not a legitimate high priest. So Paul is actually very much aware of this, but he is calling out how corrupted Ananias is because he took office of high priest for himself, and just because he wanted to have that power and influence over the people again. So Paul is in fact just being snarky at this point because he is too familiar with who Ananias is and what he represents. Hopefully I was able to explain this well to you guys in rather simple terms. Again,